Welcome to the MIT IT Innovation Program podcast. This is a repository of insights by thought leaders and practitioners of innovation where they speak about their views, insights, and experiences. Come join us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of yet another exciting initiative by MIT ID Innovation Program. Welcome to Bookmarked, an intellectually stimulating series of book reading sessions of innovation bestsellers. The virtual book reading sessions will take place every Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Here is a lineup for July and August. Do save the dates. We start with Where Good Ideas Come From by Steven Johnson today. On July 31st, we have Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. On 7th August, we have The Geography of Bliss by Eric Weiner. On August 14th, we have The Hidden Connections by Fritjof Capra. On August 21st, we have Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. On August 28th, we have Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman. About the author of our launch book, Steven Johnson. He is an author of 12 books, is a leading light of today's interdisciplinary and collaborative approach to innovation. He is known as one of the top 10 brains of the digital future, and the Wall Street Journal calls him one of the most persuasive advocates for the role of collaboration in innovation. Head of the Innovation Program, Associate Professor Harshit Desai, a PhD research candidate and industry professional who has spent a decade plus in the education domain, will be in conversation with our guest reader and innovator, Mr. Shekhar Badwe, founding director of Locus Design, a leading strategy and design company. Shekhar is an NID alumni with 17 plus years of diverse experience in strategic design, innovation, and design research. He is also a jury at India Design Mark by Government of India, a member of CII's National Committee on Design Interventions in Smart City. For those who are joining us for the first time today, I'd like to inform you that MIT stands for the 4-decade-old Maharashtra Institute of Technology. ID stands for MIT's 15-year-old Pioneering Institute of Design. MIT ID's one-year innovation program focuses on the 4 pillars of design, business, technology, and humanities. The key features and differentiators of this one-year course are immersions, project-based learning, and humanities. On behalf of the head of the innovation program and the core team, we are grateful to be amongst you all hosting this session today. Bookmarked will have our guest reader share his insights for the first half hour, followed by questions in the latter half hour. Please do read the chat for other important pointers that will be shared. This is our 28th industry interaction this season, and I, Priya Dhawan, Head of Collaborations, Branding and Outreach for the MIT ID Innovation Program, welcome you all once again to this thoughtfully curated innovation journey. So warm welcome once again, Shekhar. Over to you.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Priya. And thanks, Harshit.
Thank you, sir.
It's been 15 years for MIT ID, and I'm really glad to hear that. Fantastic.
Yeah. No, so good to have you, sir, because it's such a rare thing to talk to you, who has seen the growth of MIT ID as an institute and as an initiative for last 15 years, and here we are at again yet another new initiative for which your contribution and guidance is of again immense value. So coming to this idea of having a book reading session, I think it's an outcome of some of our very interesting discussions that we had for past few months, and again in context of innovation. So let me just get first straight to the point that why this book, and because we are talking on innovation, and why should we begin with this book first, and then we'll get into the other details of what the book is about.
So thanks once again, Harshit and Priya. Why this book? I think it is one of the very beautifully written, succinct book on where ideas come from, good ideas come from. That is one aspect. But what is also interesting is that this is one of the books which makes you think, makes you look at different ways, approaches, different domains for innovation, and you can draw parallels into design. This is very important as far as innovation is concerned. And one, of course, you will get to know as we proceed in this, that where good ideas come from. They definitely do not come from the same minds who've been banging their heads onto each other. But it needs a larger collaborative perspective. So I think this is the most apt book. Everyone should purchase it. It's not an expensive book, and it is worthwhile. It'll always keep you giving some insight or the other. Probably, I feel this is a very light-hearted, nice book to start with our series.
Fantastic. So can you also then talk about what is the central idea of the book, because and also probably give a structure of how it is organized, so that once that broader picture is set out for the audience, then we can delve deeper into some of the key topics that the book addresses on. So what you may say is a central idea of the book, or what is the author trying to really put forth as a thesis here?
So what the author is trying to say, Stephen Johnson is very, of course, young and vibrant and jubilant person to start with, and that's how the book comes out to be. The central idea, what he's trying to say is that good ideas, innovative ideas, and for that matter, innovative cities or innovative organisms do come out of a certain specific environment.
Okay.
So he's talking about how collaborative environments could be achieved, could be seen, and not in traditional management side of innovation, but he's looking at a lot of other parallels. So he's coming from the domain of physiology, organisms, natural selection, and he's trying to draw parallels, which becomes even more fascinating. So what he's trying to say is, over and above, is that you need to keep having questions in your mind. Those questions, if you bounce upon, you get mixed with a lot of diverse population, you will have very high probability of having some sort of innovation happening. So he's trying to show cases, he's trying to prove them, not really prove them, but elicit in terms of where are these coming from? Where can we look? How are ideas harbored? How are they prepared? How are they matured over a period of time? So he's also saying that there is no moment of epiphany, there is no eureka moment. That eureka moment must have had at least 10 years of prior research and prior thinking, if not research. And he has one rule called 10 by 10. So all of that, of course, we'll see. But fundamentally, connected minds is what he's talking about. And he's talking about connections.
Okay. Very interesting. I think that before we get into the presentation, and when you share the overall details of the book, why is this book titled? Because most of the innovation books are very prescriptive, right? They all are saying that how to innovate, or 10 steps of innovation, or something like that, right? And it's made into a very linear process that you do this tuck, and then innovation will happen. But the book itself is titled as to where ideas come from, and not how to do innovation. So any thoughts on that? Why is it titled like that?
I think he must have spent a lot of time in not going into the typical stereotypical zone of how ideas could be innovated or how innovation can happen. He very cleverly, clearly must have had this thought saying that how is something that can be done? Okay. But where does this happen? Where does the chemistry cook up? Where is the pudding getting made? Why is it getting made only there? So he's coming from an environment point of view, and he's not coming from a mechanism point of view. There's a big difference, and I would like to probably reiterate this point all across this 1 hour that we have, is that you need to have questions. And where would you have questions from? And this is where he's actually coming from. So he's trying to say that more the questions, and the more the questions will happen only when you are in certain environment.
Okay.
More questions cannot happen, cannot come to you if you're sitting alone. And then if you have a prescriptive book or a prescriptive mechanism or a framework, it cannot help you because you do not have a fundamental question. A very simple example, if you cannot ask Google what you're looking for,
Mm.
then you will not get any answer.
Good.
Or you can keep sitting and staring at Google and your computer or your laptop for decades, but you will never have an answer till the time you type in a question
Mm.
or a phrase or a sentence. So he's trying to say that you will have more questions, you will have more neural connections only when you are in a particular environment. And then he says that where are these environments? In nature, where are they?
Mm-hmm.
In science, where are they? In natural selection, where are they? And it's beautifully written. So he provokes you. He makes you think and not look at an answer, which is a framework. And I believe it has got 99 marks out of 100. That if you do not have a question, you will not have an answer. And Einstein said that if you've got 1 hour to solve a life-saving puzzle,
Mm.
you'll spend 55 minutes framing the question and only 5 minutes to solve it. So we should spend 5 minutes on the framework, but 55 minutes in terms of trying to decipher this question in your head.
I think
That
that's
can happen.
yeah, and that's so true of the other things also, which we frequently refer to, be it the design thinking or be it the innovation mindset or whatever we label it. I think the right question being framed and being asked is the half job done correctly, and then the answers will eventually evolve.
Yeah, Harshit, you will be surprised. Just one quick note that there's something called as the State of the Future report.
Okay.
Okay, and it documents to 2050.
Mm-hmm.
And 2050, what would be the top 15 challenges that the world will have?
Okay.
And on number 9, it is learning,
Oh.
not
Challenge.
information technology,
Mm-hmm.
not artificial intelligence,
Pure
nothing of
learn.
that. They are specifying, and it has been done by 500 people who are like top thinking minds across the world. And this State of the Future report, the 9th one is learning, and within which there is a subset that how do you frame questions. So if the leaders do not have questions, you will not have answers.
And if you have been asking the wrong questions, the answers doesn't mean anything.
That is another level.
I think a lot of our energies and efforts goes in just asking wrong questions, and people are happy finding answers to those questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So should you kind of show the highlights of the book?
Sure. So this is the book. I don't know whether it's reading correct.
Yeah.
All right. So this is my copy, and I've preserved it well. I love the hard copy versions, the paperbacks or the hardbound editions. And, they smell well and they're beautiful. Unlike the Kindle, I tried the Kindle, but I think I'm slightly old school. Nonetheless, I'll share the screen.
Yeah.
And, let's go into it. Just let me know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yep.
All right. So where good ideas come from, Steven Johnson, and he's written other beautiful books that of course we'll discuss later. But let's start with his book starts with the Darwin's paradox. And what he's trying to understand is through Darwin's journey, his documentation of things, his theory of natural selection. Though it comes out as Darwin one fine day had a eureka moment, a brainwave, and he said that, oh, now I know survival of the fittest and the natural selection and blah, blah. But if somebody really goes back and sees his notes, which are beautifully documented, in fact, couple of years before he has this announcement, his paper published, and he reads out this paper, at least 10 years before, he has this idea very clearly in his mind. All right, and what is this Darwin's paradox? So Darwin's paradox, he was flabbergasted to see that while, of course, traveling to Java, Sumatra, and in the Amazon, he figures out that the coral reefs have, which is almost 1/10 of the surface area of the earth, but has more than 25% of the species living in such a small area. And this small area has most spectacular species of the world, the entire marine life. And he also says that if you go into the Indian Ocean and try and pull out whatever 10 metric cubic gallons of water, you will not find so much species, which is found in such a small area. So what he's trying to say here is that smaller the area, more the number of connections would happen. And this is what Darwin's paradox is. Though most of us know the natural selection, most of us may not know Darwin's paradox. And this paradox is also applicable. You'll get to see it, that it is applicable to cities, it is applicable to every other thing. Like I remember outside NID, there used to be a chai and coffee place, Thela, where most of the creative moments used to happen, most creative discussions used to happen. And that space was not more than 15 by 15 square feet. And NID was 22 acres. But this 15 by 15 would have the most eclectic discussions, most amazing moments, most amazing discussions, and most amazing innovations have happened at that chai katta. And of course, MIT has one that's outside. So that's Darwin's paradox. Then he goes on to explaining what is Kleiber's law. Now, I'm not going to bore you guys with what is Kleiber's law, but it is very interesting to know that it follows a certain equation. On the right-hand side, you get to see a graph. You'll get to see animals and microorganisms and an elephant. So what it's trying to say is that a cow, which is roughly 1,000 times heavier than any bird, will on an average live 5.5 times longer and will have a heart rate of 5.5 times slower than the birds. Now this law, excitingly enough, you will say that what has this to do with design? What has this to do with innovation? But it is very interesting to see. So an elephant lives longer than a bird or a fly. Elephant's heart rate is lower compared to a dog or a mouse or a fly. All right. And the elephant is way bigger. Similar is the case with humans. Now this Kleiber's law, somebody actually was looking at Kleiber's law and it applies to metabolism. Kleiber was working with an agricultural university and he had this beautiful, amazing moment. But Kleiber also worked for almost a decade to come to this law. So somebody said that, fine, let me see if this applies to cities and whether cities behave this law. So Geoffrey West applied Kleiber's law to human-built cities. And he was delighted to see that the Kleiber's law, which is negative quarter power scaling, actually it is positive scaling. It's called superlinear scaling. Now what happens is your electrical wires that run across the city, your sewage lines, your water lines, your road lengths, your telephone cables, your everything follows superlinear scaling, which is based on Kleiber's law. Now, what Steven Johnson is trying to say is that if you look at metabolism, which is animals and plants, you could take that the way Geoffrey West took it and try to apply it to cities. Now, if somebody is doing architectural design, or if somebody is designing a town, or if somebody is designing a complex system, that complex system will always follow superlinear scaling. And this is a universal truth now, that you get to see gasoline sales, road surface area, all of this follows superlinear scaling, which is based on Kleiber's law. So Steven Johnson is saying that look at other areas of innovations and try and see what is a parallel that you could draw. Try create connections. Then he goes on to saying something very interesting, which is a long zoom. Now this is an approach. The diagram on the right hand side is in the center, you get to see the micro scale. But as you go on increasing the micro to macro, you get to see that the same scale follows. The same level of, so on the top side, you get to see global evolution, ecosystems, but it follows the same equation, the same method, the same scaling, let's say to information networks across the world. So this is something which one could look at in terms of if somebody is doing some sort of innovation, and if they're doing an innovation in settlements or they're creating settlements for the future, then they should look at ecosystems which are natural, and they get to see some innovation which is a natural phenomena, and then they can adapt that phenomena into, let's say, the settlements that they're designing. So one could also understand purely the competitive mechanisms that are involved and a lot of other things. But the long zoom lets us see that the openness and connectivity in the end will be more valuable than innovation purely. All right. So this is the kind of long zoom. This long zoom gives you a beautiful thing. There's a wonderful film by Charles and Ray Eames called 10 to the Power. So have a look at it. And it's made in 1960s. And it is one of the best films. It's a small 15-minute film you could watch by Charles and Ray Eames. This is another phenomena that I love. And though everybody experiences this everyday basis, but this word adjacent possible is so intuitive. And this adjacent possible is essentially a very simple phenomena, but it is the most essential phenomena for innovation to happen. So at any moment, the world is capable of extraordinary things, but these extraordinary things do not happen till the time the adjacent or the things around it are conducive for innovation. So if you are innovating something, one has to look at what is the adjacent possible? What is it that I can connect and create the adjacent possible? So you get to see this diagram on the right where the frontier is mentioned. If you open this barrier, innovation can happen, without which innovation cannot happen, or it will remain in isolation. I'll give you a simple example. For luxury cars to come onto Indian roads, the adjacent possible for a luxury car was government policy, people having disposable incomes, good roads, good tires, good service centers, banks funding something like this. And there are so many things that had to happen, without which adjacent possible is not possible. Right? And he gives a very simple example of carbon atom. Though it existed for billions of years, an H1N1 virus, or let's say COVID virus now, had to wait for 14 billion years to happen. All right. You cannot prepone this unless until you open the frontier, you open the barrier, and you connect things for it to happen. All right. And he goes on explaining a few other things. So what he's trying to say here is that some of these parts are conceptual. Some of them may not exist. Some of them are ideas. Some of them are theories. They are hypotheses. If you have ways of solving problems or new definitions, what constitute the problem? So we started with this as a central theme. So he's very keen on constituting a problem first, and only then adjacent possible will start opening up. If you cannot constitute a problem, then you cannot create adjacent possible. This is another beautiful thing. It's called a slow hunch. And slow hunch is what he gives examples from Darwin till date. And he says that all the great minds, all the great innovators, inventors, people who have discovered things, had this going in their head for long. It did not happen that today they just woke up and they had an idea. That's something which is, people generally love to tell stories, saying that, oh, I have had this eureka moment or this flash in my brain and I have this idea. No, they've been cultivating that question for years. Einstein took almost 8 to 9 years for constituting a problem that gave an answer in few minutes for general relativity. And it took more than 4 years for people to accept it. So he spent around 12 to 15 years, 14 years building on that hunch. And that hunch then just opened up, without which you will not have answers. You will not know how to collaborate, how to innovate, how to connect dots. So slow hunch is absolutely essential. And this is something that he says, that keep everything writing down. So at NID, we used to have this method called the left side and the right side of your diary. On the left hand side, you write all the questions that you have, all the mad ideas you have crazy thinking that is happening. On the right hand side, you keep doing your projects, but keep writing parallelly. And one fine day, all the left pages will start connecting, and you might have this eventual eureka moment. So slow hunch is extremely critical to cultivate ideas, to build ideas. And you look at all the innovation histories, you will realize that there was a question, there was a slow hunch. This is another thing, of course, we've seen, this is called acceptation. Now, acceptation is a difficult word, but acceptation is not the way we say, let's say a bird with its feathers, which is mutated into something else. More than mutation, it is hijacked by the animal or the bird or whatever. So we should look at acceptation. Now, acceptation here in this case is, let's say the bird, the feather was used, adapted for warmth, got hijacked for flight. It is still used for warmth, but it is now also hijacked for flight. So can you accept certain key features, innovations from the world into something that you're doing and connect the dots? He's saying that this is extremely important, to connect these things to create or explore newer possibilities. So a world where diverse mix of distinct professions and passions overlap is the world where acceptations thrive. So we need to have diverse, distinct professions, passions, interest groups happening together in one environment. And that's why most multidisciplinary design schools or design studios will have far higher innovation rate than specialists trying to do, and we'll get to see it, how it works. This is another thing that what he documented and which is fantastic to see, is there are 4 types of innovations. One is market and individual. Now, what does this mean? It means that certain idea or product or the question that you had in your mind has a market possibility, and it is developed or innovated or thought by an individual. Second is market and network. Network means 2 or 3 or more people jointly work towards creating something which is a marketable product. Third is non-market and individual. So what is non-market? Of course, it might have market possibilities, business possibilities, but it never started with business, money, profit, market as an agenda. So people got together, or an individual started thinking, putting questions. So Einstein did not know that general relativity will be used in GPS, or he could have been a billionaire by now. But he had this question in mind. So that is non-market individual. Non-market and network, of course, a lot of people collaborating for something which is non-market essentially to start with. World Wide Web, and there are so many others. Now, as a guest, I would like all the viewers who are today here to just imagine, where do you think maximum innovations will have happened? And he goes from 1400s till date in terms of documenting innovations, and you'll be surprised and amazed to see where most innovations are happening.
So just, sir, I'll run the poll just a minute. Huh?
Hello?
Yeah. So I will run the poll so that we get answers
Sure,
from the
sure.
audience. Yes. So we have the results like this.
Wow. All right, not bad. Let's see. Okay. Non-market individual. Fair enough. Sure. Oh my God, market and network is second. Okay, great. I think you guys are smart. Let's see what happens. So this is from 1400 to 1600. You get to see market and individual. You get to see market and network. I'll keep concentrating on market network, non-market individual. So you get to see watches. You get to see concave lenses. Earth rotates around sun, steam turbine, and on the non-market, of course, you guys are not interested in market individual and non-market network, but let's see. From 1600 to 1800, it is mind-blowing, right? So your non-market individual is magnetism, laws of motion, speed of light, piano, lightning rods, tuning fork, plant respiration, carbonated water, Hooke's law, Vernier scale, moons of Jupiter. And on your market network, chronometer, balance spring watches, steam engine, and power loom, cotton ginning. All right. Oh man. See the non-market and network, and it is phenomenal. Right? You get to see Braille, periodic table, RNA splicing, chloroform, EKG, cosmic microwave, background radiation, aspirin, DNA forensics, stratosphere, radioactivity, nuclear forces, pacemaker, vitamins, oral contraceptives, radiocarbon dating, GUI, genes, chromosomes, and whatnots. And these are only a few. Now, what is interesting is to see why it is very low on market individual. Why is it low on market network? And why is it so high on non-market side? And this is where Steven Johnson is trying to say that the moment you have a predetermined objective, which is marketability, business, or usage, you've already shut down so many ideas. You've closed your mind. You're very focused. For good ideas to come, you need to be slightly dazed and confused, and it needs to have concoction of things. It needs to be madhouse. It needs to be like a fish market. Only such great ideas can come. The moment it does not have any start point, which is business or market, you will get to see people freely collaborating. People do not have problems in terms of sharing ideas because people are working towards a problem. They're not working towards a business. The moment money, value comes into the picture, people want to be restrictive, people want to be protective. And this is the reason why not many innovations have happened in market individual or market network. So chance favors the connected mind. Thank you so much. And you guys want to see more of what thinking is happening, a lot of interesting things on my Instagram handle, and we could discuss many things there. Thank you so much.
Yep. That's fantastic, sir. I think it's a so for those who haven't read the book, I think this was a good summary, and but still this doesn't do justice to what wealth and the insights the book will offer once somebody actually reads it.
Absolutely.
So for somebody who hasn't read, do grab a copy and get into this whole world of where new ideas come from. It should will help you in so many ways. Yeah. So there was one small question by somebody who couldn't understand the network and the individual differentiation. So can you just explain it a bit more?
So networked and individual. Networked essentially is collaborations with a lot of like-minded people or variety of innovators, discoverers, inventors, etc. in a free-flowing collaborative manner, which is essentially not business driven, non market oriented goal. So if you say that I want to create, the moment I say I want to create a pencil, you have a pencil. The moment you say that I want to collaborate with, let's say, Harshit and all of you guys to create a writing device, you have millions of ideas. The moment I say that I want to market this pencil and earn money, suddenly Harshit does not want to collaborate with me because he thinks that I'm going to keep all the monies. And this is what, and I was zapped the first time I saw this. I always thought that the market, the money, the economics will push the innovation cycle, but it does not, unfortunately. Because creative minds, innovative minds require non-competitive environments. They
Is
need
it also
collaborative
is it also to do with the kind of abstraction that somebody is able to do? Because the mere ability to abstract a pen to a writing device, does that open up new avenues? Is that what is being
That
hinted
is
at?
about framing the question.
Okay.
But a lot of people would be excited to work on a writing device than.
Oh.
If I say that I want to collaborate with 10 of you guys or 50 of you guys on a writing device, you would be far more charged to work with me rather than I saying that I want to design a new pen. This is framing the question. Once you frame the question, a lot of people would want to work with you because it is non-competitive. The moment economics comes into picture, people have their agendas.
Okay.
And this is the big difference between Edison and Tesla. Nikola Tesla, not Elon Musk. So, why Nikola Tesla was far more brilliant and he had far more patents than anybody else in the world. And by the way, Nikola Tesla is a great example of non-market networked and non-market individual also. So he gave out free patents to people saying that you work on this, no problem. I want to help the world. I want to help the humanity was his agenda. And that's why he could come up with so many ideas because a lot of people wanted to be with him.
Interesting.
And Edison was alone. Okay, Edison only had electric bulb and DC electricity. Right? If you look at Nikola Tesla's patents, telephone was invented by Nikola Tesla, but Marconi copied his patent.
Patents, yeah. That's all. This now is coming out now. All the.
Yes. And then Nikola Tesla said that he's a great person. He's a nice human being. Let him use it because he's going to bring something good to the humanity. And on the other side, he also said, by the way, very interesting thing. that I'm not worried people are copying my patents or copying my ideas. I'm worried that they don't have their own.
Yeah, means
So yeah,
that's
beautiful analogies, beautiful anecdotes. There's so many things, of course.
there is another again a very favorite topic of again both of us, we have been discussing on that, but Aditya is talking about competition.
Sure.
So yeah, like it's very easy to say that yeah, means the more free flowing and open we are, more ideas will come, but there is always this hanging sword of competition, and there are good things about competition which are being said, that okay, if we compete then we excel, and all those things which comes from the largely from the competitive strategy side of things.
Sure.
But yeah, your take on that, sir, because I think this could be a good point to touch upon the entropy discussion also.
It's a beautiful question.
Yeah.
So two different answers to the question. One, Stephen Johnson and his documentation just proved it to you that it doesn't work. All right, you could do your own research, Aditya, and see whether it is true, and you find something else. That is one answer to it. But the second answer is competition is good only after you've had an idea. Okay, not before it. The moment competition comes, you become myopic. You are then benchmarking. You are benchmarking somebody else's idea. You are competitively so fierce that you ignore good ideas. You ignore abstract ideas. You ignore possibilities because you are so steadfastly moving into the direction of just beating the competition. Your focus shifts. Your purpose shifts from creating something which might, let's say, help humanity or something else to I want to beat the competition. See the difference. And this difference is what will make you super analytical. And you will lose the power or the ability of synthesis. So for good ideas, you need synthesis. You need working together, joining the dots. Once you have an idea, once you have, let's say, proof of concept, then you do what you want to do. Not before. All right.
Yep.
Another anecdotal answer to this, by the way, is that you cannot create a light bulb looking at candle manufacturers. Okay?
I think that
light bulb cannot happen.
Yeah.
So that is competition or benchmarking or whatever you want to call it.
I think same goes with so many industries that have transformed. I think similar quote is attributed to automotive also, that you couldn't have come up with a automotive by looking at a horse carriage and things like
Absolutely.
that. I think
Absolutely.
that's where competition does kind of make you rooted in very here and now things, and kind of restricts you from looking beyond what the competition has created as a boundary. So I think, yeah, that's.
I'll give you another quick thinking tool. This is off the bookmark thing, but it is very relevant as to what Harshit said. So most automobiles were benchmarked or were in competition with the horse himself. Okay. Now the way to beat this is that moving your thinking from noun based thinking to verb based. So if you take the horse out, which is the noun, and start say that I want to move or moving or mobility, then you're working on the verb and not the noun. Noun is dangerous.
Analogies of noun versus analogies of verbs. I think that that's a very, very fundamental tool, I think. And thank you, sir, for bringing this. By the way, this is part of the what we cover in the innovation program, as well as one of the first tools to open up the thinking and in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, same thing. Wheel, which is one of the classical classic inventions, and it's so classical that it has become a phrase, that reinventing the wheel. I think Deepak has a question which says reinventing the wheel is not advisable many a times. What are your thoughts on this point?
Depends. If the problem is unsolved, then you need to reinvent the wheel. There's no problem with it. But unnecessarily only to differentiate and create some sort of so-called newness, so-called innovation, then it doesn't work. I like the last question Ravi Ram has posed.
Yeah, I was also pointing towards that, because that will demand again a separate series and maybe a
I can give you a very quick
Yeah.
10-second answer.
Please do. No, sir. Please go ahead.
So the ancient Indian innovators and innovations, can we start giving due credits? Of course. The more you read, the more Indian authors start writing, we will start giving credit. And of course, Hollywood is given credit to Ramanujan. You should watch his film. It is beautiful. Okay, he only flourishes when he goes to work with like-minded, crazy people in Cambridge. All right, there are beautiful books by Sanjeev Sanyal. He's a ex-Indian Foreign Service, IS, etc., etc. Sanjeev Sanyal's book is beautiful, Land of Seven Rivers. And that's a book that you should see, and you will get to understand how Indian innovators flourish. And all of them, the Ganges basin around Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. And their meeting focal point was close to Allahabad. So there was one area where all of these guys used to come and jam, in modern terminology. So Buddha, Mahavir, and so many other people used to be in one small city, village that point in time. And imagine the atmosphere. It would have been eclectic. So the more you read, you'll realize, yes, the more Indian authors start writing, we will write the Indian history properly. All the Indian history, unfortunately, written by the Westerners who don't like to credit Indian and Indian subcontinent, and even to that matter, Chinese. They don't want to give the credit to Chinese. Of course, it will change. Don't worry. Yes.
Yeah. There are a few more.
Sure. Vishali has written something.
Yeah, Vrishali has asked it that you spoke about what constitutes a problem. It's often easier to kind of sketch out a problem and then kind of come up with a issue or define the problem. So I think it's more of using sketching as a tool for problem identification and solutioning bit. How?
So that's fine. Some people, so I if I'm thinking, I need to write. If I don't write, I don't think most of the times. It could be Rishali for you, it could be sketching, but that's not the problem. The problem is in your question, what constitutes a problem? The moment you say problem, you've already defined the solution. So you probably need to say what constitutes a opportunity.
Yeah.
What constitutes, or what is it that I'm going to achieve? So it needs to have a purpose definition rather than a correction definition. So from correction to creation. So don't say what constitutes a problem, because then you've put a problem to yourself or a barricade around yourself. She's also saying that why is it? So there's something called as, there are 5 or 6 or 7 types of people and how they learn.
Yeah.
So some people learn visually, some people learn through audio, some people learn through tactile, which is sketching, drawing, writing. And there are so many other ways that people learn. So you could be one of the types, and I'm not sure about this theory, you could look up as to the learning mechanisms or methods. Each one of us would fit into one of them.
So there is one detailed question by Angha, which is about an example of Apollo 13, in which the engineers have limited resources to create something effective. He further accepts that such conditions might not always be available and that we must make those conditions for ourselves. How can we make such building blocks for ourselves? I think that this is again one of those frequent points that we come across is so the real job of a designer or an innovator is to essentially create the conditions, yeah, and then we can also talk about the famous and the most simplest example and probably end with that.
So I don't see the question. Okay, here it is in the question answer. All right.
Yeah, in the Q&A tab. Yeah.
So there is definitely Anaga, right?
Yeah. Anaga's question.
So Harshit, can you repeat the question in short?
Yeah, so it's essentially about how do we create those conditions in which innovation can eventually flourish. That's what is the gist of the question.
So conditions is a good thing. What are the prerequisites?
Prerequisites, yeah.
Yeah. So prerequisites essentially, and this is no one way to do it. Of course, if you read Steven Johnson, you'll realize few more. And of course, if you do even more research, you will understand even more. But environment matters. The smaller the coral reef is, you will have more ideas. The coral reef should have diverse population. All right. Why there is a sudden break from innovation with China and India dominated, and suddenly you get to see before, let's say around 1700s, that is the 18th century, you get to see the entire thing shifting to Europe. And there is no one straight answer, but the reason is that most people were living in close proximity to other great thinkers. So environment matters, framing the question matters, having a question matters to start with, and then framing it well matters. There are some amazing TED Talks or videos that you guys can YouTube on why it is important to frame a question or to have questions or etc. So some sorts of that. And then you need to have diverse population together. And of course, the time and effort and the patience. Slow hunch. You guys are totally impatient with yourself saying that, no, I have to conquer the world in 36 minutes. And that's virtually impossible. So there's a rule called 10 by 10. All great innovation, inventions, discoveries, everything followed 10 by 10. 10 years of thinking, doing, and probably getting frustrated on one side. And then after that, 10 years for it to hit the market success. Okay. There's another thumb rule called 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
So if you spend 10,000 hours on one thing over 10,000 hours, you might end up having some great innovation
mastery or some mastery of that subject. So.
Yes.
Great, sir. I think there are few more questions dropping in, but I would rather use this time to just quickly talk about the next book so that the audience who has already read this and understood what we are trying to do under this bookmark series, they get a overall idea of what to expect in the next session, and then the remaining questions probably we can take it offline with the audience. So the next book is by Rebecca Solnit. I think that's what we have chosen up next, and again very important and relevant in these times, especially what everybody is seeking is some kind of a hope, and then we are looking in so many directions and so many places for that one hope, which will take us to the next new normal or whatever we call it. But yes, how would you
use that word?
That's what, yeah. So I think this book might be a better way to look at things. Then can you quickly just talk about that, and then we can conclude this with that.
So Hope in the Dark, Rebecca Solnit is a wonderful writer. Had I been in those times in the US, I would have eloped with her just for her writing. I don't know how she looks and how is she, but otherwise for her writing, I would have ran away with her. So wonderful way of writing, wonderful way, human way, simple way to come to the point. And Hope in the Dark is about how hope is the basic mechanism for us to strive, struggle, fight, overcome, and be exuberant, and be happy, and etc. So hope is that uh, tipping point. Before hope is despair. There's darkness. There is sadness. But the moment you have hope, you will get up and do something. The moment your hope dies, you will go to despair. What she is trying to say through a book is that where does this come from? Why is it important to have hope? And only when you have hope, let's say in the current scenario, if everybody would have said that I don't have any hope for, let's say, vaccines, or I don't have hope for this humanity, we would have not survived. Nobody would have put an effort. And she keeps on talking about a lot of historical stuff very simplistically. Don't worry, it's not a complex book. But if you ever want to purchase this, please purchase this book. And the first 30 pages will make you go bonkers. I've read those 30 pages for at least more than 30 times. And it is crazy the amount of things that are packed into those 30 pages. And she's got wonderful books. Otherwise, she's got, there's one book called History of Walking. Then another wonderful one is Field Guide to Getting Lost. And why do we want to? There is an urge of every human being to get lost. And where is this urge coming from? And why this urge is so important, etc. But Hope in the Dark is beautiful. I think it is most relevant for all designers, all thinkers, to give them hope, saying that even if you've spent 10,000 hours or 10 years and you've not achieved there will be something that will happen for you. So have hope and things will materialize for you. But if you become too aggressive with hope, it will not materialize. So you need to be easy. You need to be calm and patient with hope. Another thing, Harshit, I would like to point out, and I think then I'm done, is that across all these 6 books that we're going to read, all the authors had a slow hunch.
Okay.
All of them had this nagging question for years. So I want to put this question to all the members, all the great people who have taken time out on Friday evening to be here with us, is that what is the question in your mind that is nagging you for years? Not today, not yesterday, not tomorrow. Years it has been nagging you.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have this question, you will be amazed to see that how everything starts orienting, polarizing towards that question. And that is the power of this slow hunch. So have this question in your mind, your life will be beautiful and amazing. And I'm sure you guys will do something amazing in terms of innovation or otherwise as individuals or human beings. All right. Thank you.
Surely, sir. Thank you, sir, for bringing in that again, because we will surely put it out to the audience, both as a part of the feedback session also, and whoever is attending the next sessions. I think it would be good. They will gain more if they are able to bring in their slow hunch on the fore, and then things will be more relevant and aligned to them as well. Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We'll just close our discussion with this. Priya ma'am has few things to say, and then we meet next Friday again.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks, Harshit. Thanks, Priya, for organizing and beautifully curating all this. And of course, thanks MIT ID Innovation Program and MIT ID.
Yes, sir.
And biggest thanks to all of you who've participated here. All of you have been hearing us. And I would love to see you guys in person whenever we can. Till then, of course, Instagram and otherwise are good tools to have, and we could interact there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shekhar. So for more questions, do reach out to us offline. We are on all social channels. The link has been shared in the chat mode. A round of thanks to our audience for joining us today, and special thanks to our guest reader, Shekhar, for his time and sharing the value-add takeaways from this innovation bestseller. Next, I'd like to invite you to the second session about Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit this Friday, 31st July, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. So tune in to Bookmarked and let's learn, innovate, lead. Please register in case you haven't yet. We encourage you to connect with us via our social channels to know more about the MIT ID Innovation Program and upcoming engagements and online courses. For those interested in enrolling for the one-year course, we have last few seats left for the second cohort of this prestigious program that will fast-track your career path. So log on to www.mitidinnovation.com to kickstart your innovation journey with a diverse set of co-innovators. Thank you all once again. Stay connected, stay safe, and please keep innovating every day. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye bye.